Thank you for joining us today. We have something a little bit different that we haven't done before. We've had a number of devotionals, services, and various amount of content that we've been providing over the last month or so. But today we wanted to do something as a experiment, and hopefully we can provide this on a regular basis of having topics related to marriage and family. So that's why you see two of us here. So I have my wife Bonnie, and of course my name is Joe, and we're going to talk about a topic that's kind of been on our heart lately, and just really thinking about the whole quarantine situation, stay at home, and this topic of contentment. And so we start in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 10. And it says, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity." In verse 11 it says, "Now that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." And I started thinking about that word content, and Bonnie and I started talking about this passage and about the thought of content and what we're content about. I actually asked her to put together some thoughts around the word content. I call it a mind map of this word. And the definition of content, when we looked it up, was to be contained within limits, quiet, not disturbed, having a mind at peace, satisfied, easy, quietness of the mind in the present condition. And so we started talking about our early days of our marriage compared to now, and we've been married for
Almost 19 years.
19 years?
Just about.
All right, you said it kind of under your breath. I didn't know if you were sure.
19 years.
Okay, so almost 19 years. And we started thinking about the early days of our marriage, and I'm not sure who all knows our testimony, but we got married only a few months after we met. It wasn't like an arranged marriage or a blind date or anything like that, but I basically told Bonnie I was going to marry her 2 weeks after we had really started talking to each other.
I think actually this month would be 19 years ago when we met. This
Right.
month. It was Memorial Day weekend was the first time we ever met each other.
Yeah.
So May.
So we were next door neighbors, and actually she lived 2 doors down. I married the girl next door, and our relationship just took off from there. But we didn't know what we were doing. I was 25, she was
21.
And so we kind of didn't know much about anything, let alone I had just recently gotten saved before we got married. Bonnie was the one who invited me to church, and then we started off in this life called marriage. And so we started thinking about what we were content in. And so maybe just explain some of the things you remember from the early days of, how we were living, what we had, and how things were in the very first part of our marriage.
Well, when I met Joe, like he said, he was my neighbor, lived just pretty much, there was one apartment in between our apartment, and he had a roommate. So I think my lease was just about up right about the time we got married. So I moved in with him and his roommate. So we really just had, our bedroom was our space, and then we shared the living room and the kitchen and whatever. So we just had really what you had in your bedroom. I had a few things from my apartment, but all of that was like stuff my mom and dad left me when they moved away. So we really didn't have a lot, just that little room.
So we also, besides the queen bed and some furniture for a television and a desk and things like that, we had some stuff in storage, which was like a couch given to us that we kept and used for probably a good few years after we got it in our first few years of marriage. And most of the furniture and everything in the house we had was second, third, or even fourth hand, right?
Yeah. A lot of the furniture I had in my apartment was stuff that my family actually would find at yard sales or was given to them. So it was even further, like my parents got it from someone else or from a yard sale who, it was, like stuff that would have been in my great-grandmother's living room.
And I was in the Air Force at the time. I was enlisted. We didn't make much money back in the early 2000s, and Bonnie was working at a retail store at that time. I think the biggest thing we got when we had gifts from our pretty much elopement.
Yeah.
We got married in a courtroom. We had guys in shackles sitting there watching us as the judge took a break between rendering decisions and that, and guys in shackles kind of just like this shaking their hands at us. So that was a memory to behold for our wedding day. We didn't get a group picture or anything, but we did have a pretty memorable time. But I remember we didn't make much. We didn't eat out much. What we had wasn't very much. We didn't have a lot of gadgets or toys. I don't even think we could afford hobbies, so we didn't get into that. But it was just us.
Yeah.
It was just the 2-bedroom apartment that we only had one room of,
Right.
and shared the other half. And but it was great. And I remember that even then, it wasn't like we felt. At least I didn't feel like we were missing out on something, that we wished we had things that we didn't have. Did you have any of those feelings?
No.
And thinking about those times 19 years ago for us, and thinking about what Philippians 4 says with contentment, I started thinking through, and we started talking about what are some areas in marriage that we could have been, or others may have been, discontent in at various times in marriage. And we've done marriage counseling for many people over the years in the ministry. We've helped with young couples, and couples have been married for many years, couples that were on the verge of divorce, and a lot of things that come up from being discontent in marriage. I wrote down a list of things. The biggest one I had thought about was unmet expectations, meaning one spouse would say that their spouse wouldn't change, or maybe a couple would say their spouse had drastically changed. How about something that you could think of that would cause discontent in marriage?
I think something that could cause discontentment is maybe if you see a couple or something and you think you see something in that husband that you wish your husband had. Like you would almost, I wish my husband would be like that.
So comparison. Then.
Yeah.
So comparing somebody else's marriage to your marriage, or and we can easily compare not just people that we know or friends, or just observing other people around you. I mean, people will compare their marriage to ones on television.
Yep.
Well, this is how this family dealt with that problem. Let me deal with it this way, or I wish my spouse did this instead of doing that.
Yeah.
Personality differences, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I've seen discontentment in marriages like insecurity. The wife would be very negative about things towards herself. Or as a husband, you feel like you're failing in certain ways, in certain areas, because you don't do this, or you do this too often. And that insecurity can lead to discontentment, and it actually rubs off on each other.
Yeah.
Worry, just worrying about things that are going on in a marriage, which is partly related to insecurity, but then also worrying about things that never happen, building things up inside that could, or what if this did, it could cause issues. How about another area?
I don't know. Throw a blank.
So I wrote down another one on thanklessness. Just not being thankful for each other, not considering one another. Just the little things that can lead to a strong feeling of discontentment in marriage, that a spouse will say, well, they don't think of me whenever they do this, or I wish they would
Yeah.
consider me.
I guess not feeling appreciated for the things that you do, or
Right.
something like that.
Right. Yeah, it goes both ways in that.
Yeah.
And another one that's a huge issue is financial challenges.
Yeah.
Debt, living beyond your means, and that that one definition of contentment made me think in that regard as being contained within limits.
Yeah.
Financial challenges usually come because the spouse or the couple together try to keep up in comparison with other couples, or try to have all these things at a stage in life when they're not prepared for it.
Yeah, and I think something else too, like, because we didn't really know each other all that great when we first got married. We really got to know each other within our first few years of marriage. I don't feel like I'm a super like high maintenance person, but my husband shows me love through just, he always wants to make sure, you always want to make sure you're meeting my needs, or if there's something that you may think I want, and I think a couple can get in trouble that way sometimes if they are always trying to make their wife happy through those means when you really don't have them. You know, like when we first got married, he would buy things, but we were smart about it. But I know you would have loved to have given me a lot more. Like, and the further along we've got married, the Lord's blessed us more. You've been able to do that. But that's one way a husband or a wife even may show their love, is just by wanting to always pour the gifts on their spouse, and you can get in trouble like that.
It makes me think of the wedding rings we first bought. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was special. I mean, we went together and picked them out, and then later on, like, well, let's go ahead and try and upgrade it, get you a better ring, because we could afford it. Back then, we barely could afford any kind of rings.
Right.
You know, and then now we're at the point where, okay, let's go ahead and get those nice rubberized rings.
Right.
Instead of diamonds or gold or something like that,
Yeah.
which cost probably about $30.
I know.
And even then, it's kind of hard to justify spending that money. Like, I already have a ring. What do I need a rubber one
Right.
for?
But when we first got married, if we would have even considered like rubber rings, we would have been like that's all we could get. You know, where
Right.
now we're like, oh, it'd be so nice and comfortable. And
It's actually gone backwards
Right.
in the opposite direction. And so, when we consider about contentment in marriage, though we didn't have much, and though we didn't really have the means to do a lot of things, now I think about after 19 years of marriage, or almost 19 years of marriage, at least 19 years of knowing each other, you think about what we have compared to those days back in a little 2-bedroom apartment in Lancaster, California, now living here in Great Mills, Maryland, Lexington Park, Maryland. So I don't even know where we live. We have now 6 amazing, smart, beautiful, crazy children, 2 dogs that annoy the daylights out of us.
I mean, more probably.
Compared to things we had then, what do you think of now? As in our marriage now that we have that we didn't have then.
Well, like you said, now we have six amazing kids. Where within our first year of marriage, we just had our first, and then all those new experiences, but trying to grow. But our kids are now really so self-sufficient. So it's changed so much where they don't need mom to do everything. So it's a lot different, and even that kind of helps where I can focus on you probably more than I probably could when they were real little, because moms are up all night. At least he could sleep through screaming right next to him, and I would be like, oh no, she burped, I'm awake. Where now we don't have that. We don't have kids coming in our room or sleeping in our bed or
Right.
So.
You think about a 2-bedroom apartment now. Now we're at a house that has 4 bedrooms.
Yeah.
To fit everybody in it. We had 1 vehicle that if that thing broke down, we wouldn't know what to do. Now we have 2 vehicles where if they broke down, I'm not sure we'd know what to do.
Yeah. But even a year and a half ago, we lived in a place where we had 1 bathroom. We're all sharing 1 bathroom. Where now we even have 3 bathrooms in the house. So the Lord has definitely brought us a long way.
We have, each of us have our hobbies. There's things we, are able to take vacations every once in a while. There's creature comforts that we enjoy now that, I don't know how we get along with if we didn't have them, but you didn't even think about them. I didn't think about them early on. The furniture and appliances we have, though we appreciate, things that people hand down to us because we still like that.
Right.
But we have furniture and appliances in every room to the point that it almost feels like a yearly thing where we want to have a yard sale,
Right.
to get rid of things so we can go buy other
Declutter.
things
Right.
that we want but don't necessarily need. But then getting back to Philippians chapter 4, verse 12 says this: I know both how to be abased, humbled, or at a lower point, and I know how to abound everywhere and in all things. I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. And what I believe Paul is talking about here is that he's experienced those highs and those lows, those ups and those downs, those periods of where times were tight to those periods where things were bountiful. And that's a lot like marriage. There's periods in our marriage where it was tight and things were tough, not just financially, not just the possessions we owned, even in our relationship. Early on, we had to get used to being around each other
Right.
and living with each other and dealing with our idiosyncrasies.
Just basically getting to know each other.
Right.
We didn't know really what would, he may put his toothpaste on the left side, I put it on the right. You have to get to know the type of things we liked and didn't like.
And those things didn't just fix themselves after a couple years. I mean, we're still doing those things now and dealing with those.
Right.
I feel like just in the last couple years, things that used to bother me just 4 or 5 years ago, I feel like I've gotten areas where they don't bother me anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's the same way, but there's always new things, or why did she do this, or why did he do that?
Yeah.
Decisions, why did they make this decision, or why did they say it this way?
Right.
But then going back to contentment, what I realized and what we talked about as we were going through this passage and discussing this topic, our contentment was never about the things we didn't have almost 19 years ago. And our contentment isn't about the things we do have more of or differently than here today. Contentment's not about understanding or even appreciating the days when we had nothing or the days when we had much. And the danger of thinking that contentment is about what you have or don't have, or what you can do or can't do, is that it kind of mentally speaks to having this mindset that we're all about materials and possessions. That mentality tends to speak towards materialism. It tends to speak towards possessions, as if that's the metric for our happiness and contentment. Our happiness can't be based upon, well, we're doing better than we used to be, or you have more than you used to have, or we don't deal with those things like we used to do. In fact, Matthew 6:31 says, "Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or wherewithal shall we be clothed?" And he goes on in verse 32, "For after all these things do the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these things." Then we get to a very familiar verse here in Matthew 6:33. "But seek ye first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." In reality, God's promise to take care for the needs that we spend so much time working for, worrying about, or wanting more of. God eliminated those cares because he desires us to set our affection, our hope, and our contentment in him. It wasn't in what we had or what we used to have or what we do or what we used to do or what we didn't have. What we had almost 19 years ago when we first got together and got married is the same of what we have today. We have the Lord. He's always been the source and the originator of our contentment. And then all these other things were added into our lives, but they didn't make our life better or worse because we had him. Therefore, if something got taken away or something got added to our lives, it wasn't about whether it was good or bad, because we had the Lord. I think that's a big part of what's helped our marriage in 19 years, is really being content in him,
Yeah.
not in the things we had or didn't have. 1 Timothy 6 says this in verse 6, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content." The great gain spoken of here is related to the blessings of contentment, that God is enough for us. So you think about that, couples. Is God enough in your marriage? That really eliminates a lot of things that you can put on that list of wants and needs and must-haves if you just decide that God is enough for you. When God's enough, we're depending upon the providence of him to provide for us from day to day. He is what should satisfy us. When we're satisfied or content in how he's working in our lives, then we shall not only want and be content, but now we're tied to him who strengthens us above what anyone else can do in our lives. He provides that strength because we're content in Him. And being in Him, with Him, and content with what He's doing is where godliness is originated from. But if we have any other thing that is the source of our contentment, we're actually idolizing and worshiping that which makes us happy, or the lack thereof is what brings us down. That's idolatry in its most basic sense. But being content in the Lord and content in Him as the one who brought us together in our marriage, then there's no worry about what we have or don't have or can or cannot do. And that brings us full circle back to Philippians chapter 4 and verse 13. It says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. I really think that's, in verse 13, we tend to look at that verse in a very isolated way. I mean, when you think of that verse by itself without any context, how do you consider that verse?
I guess like if I had a certain task I needed to do, or something that, a burden I needed to face, or something that God would give me the strength to handle that.
Right, and so that's how I would usually think of that. Well, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. He's the source of my strength, but how did that strength come from Christ to me, in what way, and what was the context was? It goes back to verses 12, 11, and 10 in Philippians chapter 4. It was the familiarity of knowing that Paul said of being abased, to being in a place of abounding, to having not much, to having quite a bit, to being low and to being up, just like marriage. Mm-hmm. It's those times of trouble and those times of great enjoyment, those times of ramen noodles and hamburger helper.
Yeah, my least two favorite things ever.
To the times of having steak every once in a while for dinner.
Yeah.
Just amazing how God allows you, by being content in Him, to get through those lean periods and to be able to enjoy the blessings that He does provide. But it wasn't because of the things you had or didn't have, it is because you had the Lord. So to wrap this up, I guess the strength in marriage comes through Christ. When our relationship with Christ is a source of our contentment, His provision comes from Him knowing exactly what we need. Being thankful for what we have is good, and we should be thankful for what we have, but being thankful for who we have is infinitely better. Good is looking around and saying, praise the Lord. But I think really better is looking up to God and saying, thank you, Lord. Itemizing that list every once in a while for all the things that you give us, all that you provide us. Thank you for our job and the times where we've had to take up extra work. Yeah. How many times have you worked in our marriage? I mean, at a job that you didn't work at home at?
A few times. I cleaned houses for quite a while. I did that for a very long time. And then odd and end things, and then a few years I worked an actual job, 8-hour, 9-hour job. So yeah, God's had us through times where I was able to stay home, other times where financially I needed to work, and then so yeah.
And you definitely worked at homeschooling.
Oh yeah, yeah. Why do we always forget those? That's like the hardest job, honestly. I'd rather do the other ones.
It didn't pay very well monetarily either.
Monetarily, but watching your kids learn to read and the light bulbs, click and stuff like that, always makes that job worth it.
But even in tough times, we do what we had to do. We did what we had to do.
Yeah.
But in reality, that didn't determine our happiness or our unhappiness. It was the Lord providing that strength because we were content in Him, which ultimately strengthened our marriage over these years, and Lord willing, we'll continue to do that.
Yeah.
So that's just a thought we wanted to share with you about contentment, and maybe you have some things in your life that you're maybe not as pleased with, or things you're considering, or maybe you wish you had certain things, or you wish your spouse it would be a certain way. I'd encourage you to do this. Consider Him. Consider Christ. Are you content in Him? Do you believe and do you feel that the Lord knows exactly what you need? He knows exactly who you need. He knows exactly what you need from him or her in your marriage. And then maybe consider thanking God for who he's given you. I mean, yeah, sure, we're thankful. Yeah, thank you for my wife, or thank you for my husband, my wife might say. But really going to God and expressing exactly what you're thankful for. Are you thankful that your spouse is different than you? Or do you want somebody exactly like you? Are you looking to make your husband or your wife into your image of what they should be? Or are you desiring and asking God to make them into the image of Christ? Well, thank you very much for allowing us to be here today, and we look forward to speaking to you again, and God bless you and have a great day.